Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at the OnePlus 7T and see how this device holds up in 2022. Now I just got done talking about the OnePlus 7T Pro, and I can definitely tell you the 7T was a really solid device when it first came out, and I still think it's pretty good. The only problem is that the software and OnePlus as a whole has taken such a nosedive, not only in probably sales numbers of the devices themselves, but also in the public reception. I don't think people look at OnePlus anymore like how they used to, which is kind of sad because the OnePlus devices used to be my favorite device, and now it's probably leaning more towards Samsung and maybe even a little bit for the Google Pixels as well. Now if you want to pick up some phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now on the front of the OnePlus 7T, we do have a beautiful, it's a pretty good panel, a 6.55-inch Fluid AMOLED display, and it's a 90Hz panel, and I still think it looks pretty good. You know, it's not like the best looking panel anymore, but it's not bad and it's not ugly. You know, you have that like V display kind of thing, so it's not a hole punch. It's a little bit of a notch up top, but I don't really mind too much. You do have an inbuilt fingerprint sensor in the display, which is nice. You have a little bit of bezel around the screen itself, but it's not anything crazy, and I actually think the front of this phone looks pretty good. The chassis of this phone looks very good and still feels very premium as well. You have the USB Type-C port on this thing, which is awesome. And on the back, you have this kind of mixture of like a frosted back, but not really. It's actually kind of a really nice feeling back. I actually did like it a lot. And personally, I think this phone still feels and looks very premium. However, this phone is not perfect, and there are such weird things that, you know, OnePlus did at this time, which still doesn't make any sense to me at all. With something like the OnePlus 7T, you would think this phone has IP certification, but it actually doesn't. There's no IP certification on this phone. I'm sure it's still pretty durable here and there, but it is not, you know, a super, you know, durable phone in that sense. And it also doesn't have something like wireless charging, which nowadays is probably the most basic feature to have on a phone. And I don't even like wirelessly charging my device, but having that ability is super nice. And the fact that OnePlus didn't put it on their phones for many generations was actually very weird in my opinion. So for this specific sense, I think the OnePlus 7T on the outside looks really good, but because of those specific things that they kind of took out in the beginning with, things like the wireless charging, things like IP certification, it just doesn't really make too much sense to me why they went that route in my opinion. Now on top of that, I guess moving on to the camera setup, this is actually the most interesting thing about this phone. It does have the setup that I like, although the quality may not be as top tier as usually I would like it to be. You do have that triple camera setup on the back, so you have a wide angle lens, a telephoto lens, and an ultra wide sensor. Now those sensors are really strong to have nowadays. You have the ability of doing 4K at 60 on the back, which is really good, and you can go up to 1080p at 240 even if you want to, which is so weird. On the front, you have a 16 megapixel wide angle lens, and you can do only 1080p videos on here. Now with this phone coming out in 2019 September, you do have to kind of remember that there were a lot of phones that were still catching up to 4K on the front, but a lot of phones at this point already could have done this. The iPhone 11s that came out near this had that capability, and the Samsung Galaxy S10 from earlier on in the year already had the capability too. Now OnePlus was never known for having the best cameras, but it's still a pretty strong thing to have something like that, you know, to have a pretty good camera setup, and unfortunately a phone like this did not have that capability. It's not the end of the world, but it is one of those things to keep in mind. With a phone like this, you're not going to be getting that super quality camera. And because the OnePlus 7T is still kind of expensive, it's not expensive, but compared to other 2019 phones, you can pick up a Galaxy S10 for around the same price as the OnePlus 7T, and that phone has a substantially better camera than this thing. So with all that being said, something like the OnePlus 7T, I think it's okay in the camera department. It's definitely not amazing, and it's definitely probably not going to impress anybody, but there's still quite a few features built into the camera app, which is nice, and I do like having the ability of having that triple camera setup right there. Having the ability of zooming in and zooming out a lot is really cool, and I'm glad at least the OnePlus 7T has that type of capability. So in terms of the camera setup, that kind of covers it up there. Now in terms of the software experience, like I mentioned, this was the most probably interesting spot that OnePlus kind of dropped the ball in. From my experience, like I mentioned, I've never seen a phone company fall from grace quite like OnePlus. There were phone companies like Motorola and like, you know, maybe HTC as well, that were high at one point and then dropped down, but I wasn't really involved with those phones. OnePlus, I actually loved this device, and this one went down just like crazy, which is so weird. It's like they were here today and gone tomorrow. Now with the OnePlus 7T, I think something like, you know, the software is still okay. I mean, it's still a good software phone for the most part until you go ahead and start updating it. The only reason I would even recommend getting something like a OnePlus right now is if you want to go ahead and custom ROM this device. If you're willing to do that and if you're okay with that, then that is something I would probably consider for you to do. That type of quality and capability is still there, and you have that type of capability there. But unfortunately, for a vast majority of you, you probably don't want to do that. It's just like extra work and it's tedious, so it still doesn't really make too much sense to do it. And I don't think the common person is probably going to end up doing that either. So in terms of software, that kind of covers it up, to be honest. In terms of performance, this device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 Plus chipset inside of it, with 8GB of RAM on both models that came out with this device. And a really good thing about this specific phone is that you do have the capability of having pretty good performance. And this is kind of a two-part thing. One, not only do you have a pretty decent performing chipset in here at that time, but still, it's actually a really decent performing phone. A lot of phones nowadays still base out at 8GB of RAM, which is totally fine for me. But also when you factor in the fact that this thing has that 90Hz panel too, well, that's a really cool, you're already kind of setting yourself up in a really good situation. And because even though the software on this phone has been really weird recently, the ones I have, the OnePlus I have still has, the older version of the software on it. And I've been getting some really decent performance on it. I think from everything from playing games, like Genshin Impact and that kind of stuff, to playing, kind of decent heavy games, to even like random texting and phone calls and stuff like that. I still think this phone has a lot of capability there, which is really cool. It's not necessarily going to replace a Galaxy S22 by any means, but there's still a lot of performance built into a phone like the OnePlus 7T, and I'm sure there's still a lot of people who are watching this video who are still happy about the performance with this phone. So I think keeping those things like in the back of your head, it should probably be mentioned that the OnePlus 7T is still a decent performing phone. It's definitely not better than any of the phones that came out recently, but it is a good performing phone, especially when you consider the age and the price that this phone is right now. So that kind of covers it up in that standpoint. Now, battery life wise, this device has a 3800 mAh battery inside of it. Now, that's not a bad battery size. That's actually still pretty big. The weird thing is, like I mentioned, no wireless charging and no reverse wireless charging that a lot of phones have nowadays as well. And when, again, you compare it to the Galaxy S10 that came out the same year, that's older than this phone, that device had so much capability within it. And I do understand the 7T was approaching a different market. I still feel like OnePlus could have done a better job at that point as well. So in terms of the battery life standpoint, I would still give the edge to, another phone, not going to be named, but the OnePlus 7T, is still a good performing phone when it comes down to it in terms of battery. But again, no wireless charging, and the battery is probably degraded quite a bit because it is an older phone as well. So that kind of covers it up there. And to be completely honest, I think the OnePlus 7T is still a decent phone when you consider everything but the software and the future of this phone. So, because OnePlus is now, the software is just kind of weird all over the place, it doesn't really make too much sense for me to even recommend this phone. I would recommend buying something like a Galaxy S20 that you could probably buy around the same price as this. That one, still is pretty good too. You're giving up stock software for the most part, but you are getting a microSD card slot and a 1440p amazing display and way better cameras on that thing too. And that is actually a flagship. With this type of device, on the other hand, it's not quite what you would expect. It's a good phone, I would say, but like I said, my opinion has changed quite a bit on this device. It used to be like I would recommend this phone like crazy all the time. Now I don't really recommend it too much because of everything that's been circulating around this specific phone. So the phone is good, but I just don't really know about the company too much anymore, to be honest. So that kind of covers it. Like I said, if you want to pick up some phones, I would recommend. Links are down in the description. Hit the like button if you guys enjoyed the video, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.